Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has criticized the decision by governors of 17 states in southern Nigeria to ban open grazing of cattle. The president also calls to question the legality of the decision. He says the governors have offered no solution to the issue of clashes between farmers and herders and are just trying to flex their political muscle. According to presidential spokesman Garba Shehu, President Buhari has now approved a plan that will lead to a permanent solution to the frequent confrontations between the farmers and nomadic Fulani herdsmen. What is this plan, Tundu, that have not been put forward all these years?
It has, though. The National Livestock Transformation Plan of 2019
is that not
was
Ruga?
put forward. No.
Okay, rural grazing.
No.
Okay.
Ruga was rejected.
Okay.
And then the NEC approved this National Livestock Transformation Plan in 2019. But here we are in 2021, and not one single ranch has been built. That plan foresaw a situation where in the next 10 years, so by 2028, there would be 119 ranches all over the country. And all 19 northern states agreed to house those ranches and 5 southern states. And the federal government was supposed to put up 80% of the funding. That has not happened. I guess the federal government is cash-strapped, so nothing has been done. Not one ranch has been built. So nature abhors a vacuum. When nothing is being done at the federal level, it is the responsibility of state governors to take up the challenge and ban open grazing. Now, I think that President Buhari's response here is wholly inappropriate in both content and tone, because it is the job of the governors to do precisely what they have done. The National Livestock Transformation Plan also prohibits open grazing because it recognizes the problems that open grazing has caused. So what exactly is his problem? The problem that he seems to be expressing reminds me of his little voyage to Oyo State in the year 2000 when Lamadishina was governor, when he went to challenge him with a group to say, your people are killing our people. The president is coming across as parochial. And the same way he was flawed by the Governor Additional at the time is the same way his current statement has no basis in any kind of fact. That objection that he made then was completely discredited. It was the Fulani herders clashing with their host community and killing them. And there were 5 Fulani herders unfortunately killed, not 68 as he claimed. So this is the same sort of hysteria, the same sort of paranoia that I can sense in this statement that he has made. Again, I will repeat, wholly inappropriate, especially at a time of such ethnic tensions, when people are unhappy with what we perceive as nepotism, with what we perceive as the president seeing only one constituency as those he is serving, not the rest of us, unlike the oath that he took to Nigerians, the entirety of Nigerians. So I really wish he had. We often talk about how he doesn't speak much, he's not loquacious enough and what have you. This is one of those examples where he should really have kept this to himself. And talking about the legality or otherwise, he's not a lawyer, so I really can't blame him. He's taking legal advice from his Attorney General, who is misinformed. It is a court that will now decide this. The president at the federal level has decided against open grazing. So what is this knee-jerk reaction, this knee-jerk rejection of what Southern governors has done? It looks sinister to me. And the last time I checked, our president is a staunch Muslim. He needs to step back from this Hindu-like reverence of the bovine.
Okay. Yesterday, I made a point that the big problem we have with the challenge of open grazing is that it is interpreted, categorized, analyzed, presented as if it is a North-South conflict.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it is.
And I made the point that, look, there are voices of reason in the North who are also opposed to reason, opposed to open grazing. And I made the point that Femi Falana SAN did an essay published on the back page of This Day. Okay, I hope I don't get sued by Femi Falana SAN for overquoting, over-appropriating his views in that particular article. But the point that he made there is that he provided documentary evidence, concrete evidence of the fact that there are also stakeholders and forces in the North who are opposed to open grazing because they don't think that is the modern approach. They don't think that it is productive. They don't think that it's a sustainable approach. And he quoted the Northern Governors Forum, he quoted the Arewa Consultative Forum, he quoted the Miyetti Allah Forum, he quoted other groups in the North, and he documented all of that in that article in which he said, look, this is not a North-South conflict. Yeah. This is about how Nigeria can progress. This is how a particular economic interest can be advanced. Now, yesterday, I quoted Tanimu Yakubu, who was a cabinet member in Katsina State at the time, and who was at the time chief economic advisor to the president of Nigeria. And he wrote an article, Why Open Grazing Must Be Discontinued. He's a northerner. It's part of that heritage. If they are talking about heritage, tradition, religion, whatever it is. And he articulated it, and he said, in fact, open grazing poses a threat to the environment. The Nigerian president goes every September to the United Nations to talk about climate change. We've been talking about climate change in the presidential speech at the UN General Assembly for the past 10 years. Okay? And now we have a major issue, a major area in which Nigeria can contribute to resolving this climate change crisis that the entire world faces. And unfortunately, Nigerians have reduced it to ethnicity, to religion. Now, to come to the point about the statement that has been issued by the president, I think it's very unfortunate. It is most embarrassing. But Tunu, you are right. He must have been advised by the Attorney General of the Federation, whose attention has been drawn repeatedly to the fact that this Section 41 of the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria is not talking about the free movement of cattle. It's talking about the free movement of citizens. It says every citizen. Nobody has banned any Fulani person or anybody of northern extraction from moving around Nigeria. The southern governors, also supported by the PDP governors of Nigeria, also supported, incidentally, by the Southwest leaders of the APC, have all said that, look, what the federal government should do is to support ranching, provide resources, provide the opportunity for ranching to take place. But here, we are now faced with a situation whereby the president of Nigeria is towing the line of the Attorney General of the Federation to talk about illegality, to talk about unconstitutionality. I think the only option left open is the position held by Governor Akeredolu of Ondo State, who happens to be chairman of the Southern Governors Forum, because he issued a statement in which he said that Southern governors are ready to go to court to challenge the Attorney General. We have had many cases, AG Edo State versus AG Federation, AG Lagos versus AG Federation, AG Bender versus AG Federation, in which the issue was about finance, resource allocation. Okay, now on this open grazing, I think that the rules of interpretation should be brought into play with regard to Section 41. And it's only the court, the Supreme Court, that I think can resolve the matter or should resolve the matter. And I think it's also very strange, very disturbing that the presidency would take a position that smacks of ethnic alignment, and that really is the big problem. Because from the point of view of PR, I don't think that the presidency should have issued that statement that Garuba Shehu signed yesterday. It would have been better, perhaps, to keep quiet and allow the states to resolve the matter on their own. But of course, the president is perhaps duty-bound to take the advice of his Attorney General.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abati. We'll go on a quick break. You wonder, is it just about cattle? Or cattle, I should say. Cattle, I should say. Or it's something more than this. Welcome back. Still the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Let's go to Michael Wilson. Michael, good morning from London.
Good morning. Stocks rallying, really. There's been a bit of inflationary lack of fear about it, really, just slightly more positive, not saying it's gone away. And also the proposals from the United States, which I was telling about yesterday, to reduce the minimum rate now of corporation tax of 15% rather than the 28% that was originally proposed. It's helped stocks really, and that sort of has overflowed into Asia Pacific markets as well. Positive after Wall Street was quite good. Singapore's been good. I'll come on to that in a second. So today, Taiwan led the gains. Basically, mainland China stocks up as well. South Korea up 2. S&P, ASX 200 in Australia doing quite well. And Singapore's economy expanded by 1.3% year on year. So that's quite good news for them. The ministry also announced it would maintain the Singapore forecast for 2021 to be 4 to 6% growth, which is actually for Singapore quite interesting, really. Crypto turbulence again, more tweets from Musk. The price of Bitcoin jumped about 4% after he tweeted yesterday that he was having active discussions about the sustainability of the digital coin. It was trading around 38,000 yesterday, and it went up very, very slightly. All this volatility, once again, is a very rude awakening for anybody who wants to join in the games with Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies. The world's largest digital currencies fluctuated within a range of about 30% over the past few days. Remember last week it was down to 30,000. So, you pays your money, you takes your choice. In India, big problems, of course, with COVID, as you well know. It's forced shutdowns in Nissan and Hyundai, automakers are saying, and there's growing unrest amongst workers about the pace of the injections, whether they're going to get them or not. We feel very sorry for, our big feelings for those kind of people. Imagine going to work every day and then not knowing whether you're going to be healthy when you finish. That really is terrible. I was talking about US global tax. It looks like the Biden administration is kind of settling for this 15% figure that I said yesterday. However, it still has to go through all the administration, and perhaps it might be 21%. I mean, who knows? But basically, the move away from 28% downwards is helping people. And if the US remains competitive for businesses to do business within it, in other words, overseas business to do within it, then that's good news for overseas businesses. As far as the UK concerned, the Belarusian airspace is now closed to UK airlines and so on. Just let me tell you how serious that's actually what is. When a plane's actually in flight, it is still in the country of where it's actually based. This flight over Belarus was actually a Ryanair flight, but it's registered in Poland. So thus, it was Poland's sovereignty that was interrupted by this Belarusian. And I've got a friend who's a pilot here, and he said he'd never, ever experienced anything like this in the whole of his life, flying for Virgin for over 30 years. But if a fighter plane comes up next to you, you do not say no. So that's what's happened there. The UK is going to triple its ultra-rapid charging points from by 1,800 of them in the next 2 years. That's quite important. That takes the total to 2,700. That's the authorities, the energy authorities actually pushing that. Of course, they'll want to do that because we've got this big green conference coming up at the end of the year in November, and it's going to be very, very important for Britain to be able to show that it's actually supporting the idea of electric cars. As far as commodities are concerned, very, very quickly, oil, reacting to Iran, really, very, very mixed messages coming from Iran, quite honestly, about it's the biggest wild card at the moment, so whether that means it's up or down, who really knows. And gold itself continues to rally. Any thoughts that inflation is down a bit tends to boost gold. That's your global view.
All right. Well, okay, go ahead.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Bati, for the privilege. Real quickly, Michael, I just want to talk about two things. Cryptocurrency, where do we stand? Andrew Bailey is coming out to say this is dangerous. That's the, Reserve Bank chief in the UK. If you've got, that's not your nomenclature anyway. But he's saying this is terrible. But what I see now is that most of the big boutique banks are beginning to open up portfolio for some of their top-end clients in cryptocurrency. So it's a department that is managing top-end client portfolio in cryptocurrency. I mean, what should we understand about this? Andrew Bailey is saying otherwise the banks are going ahead and doing deals in cryptocurrency. And second question for me will be, let's talk a little bit about the business implication. All of this mishap happening in Minsk, it's the mess of Minsk, I call it. What is really going on? Can't Europe take its dictator out? This is affecting business already.
I don't really understand. I get the first point, which I'll answer. The second part, I don't quite understand what you mean. Just explain again to me what you mean by the second point. What I mean
is this has disrupted the flight cycle in Europe because of what Lukashenko has done in Belarus. How can you send a fighter jet to say there's a bomb scare just because you want to arrest one person in all of this?
Okay. So number one then, let's do the airlines first of all. As I said, if you are flying an aeroplane and it's registered in a country, that is your international, and that's well recognized throughout the whole of the airline business, that is your sovereign space, and it should not be interrupted. And again, but if you've got a fighter plane coming up next to you, then the civilian airline pilots will say, that's it, we're going to land. We'll do exactly what it says. And in fact, Vilnius was not on any flight plan of Ryanair Airlines either. So what's happened is a rogue state has had to do something. Yes, it's as though this journalist is actually is been protesting about some of what's going on in that particular country. So there will be sanctions against it. But it is a rogue state. Everybody is vulnerable to rogue states. Yes, of course they are. They only have, just like terrorists, to get it right once, and everybody's very worried about it. Cryptocurrencies, yes, major banks, major financial houses have actually started. We've been reporting on this for the past 2 or 3 months. The reason they're doing it is, of course, if you're a bank and you've got a load of customers saying, tell us about cryptocurrencies, are you going to start a trading desk? If there's enough critical mass of those customers, then of course you are. What you're not saying, of course, is how far that actually extends into your asset management. That's the crucial question. And I would say, given the volatility of Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, and we're not talking about central bank currencies, we're not talking about gov coins, we're talking about cryptocurrencies and the independent ones and so on, which are away from fiat currency, like Bitcoin. So if you do that, then completely up to you. But as far as banks are concerned, institutional, they're just going where the money says.
Well, Michael, I wanted to ask you about Tata Steel. Tata Steel has just introduced a scheme under which it is saying that it would provide salaries, incentives, support for families of its staff that died from COVID-19 until those employees, even although dead, reach the age of 60. And Tata Steel of India is not alone in that regard. There's also Oyo Rooms, there's also Borosil. Now, how about that in terms of corporate social responsibility? Do you think that's a model that should be adopted by other countries? Although India, yes, is now the epicenter of COVID-19 in the world, with 300,000 persons already dead. And now, with regard to Lukashenko, yes, the last dictator in Europe, we hope that he ends that title. But what's the subtext of, the UK's reaction to, Belarus, considering the fact that in October last year, the European Union, in fact, placed a lot of sanctions against, Belarus. And finally, I don't know how many of these topics you'll be able to take in the remaining period. Inflation. There is a consensus in the United States that inflation, has become a reality. But what is the Federal Reserve likely to do next, particularly with regard to interest rates?
All right, let's do it first of all then. So the 3 questions: inflation, Belarus, and I can't remember the first one that you said, but we'll do inflation first of all in the United States. So this, still, what we say about inflation in the United States is, yes, of course there's a worry about that. There always is. The Fed have said that what they're going to do is they're going to look through those spikes and to see what happens. They'll probably take a view by the end of the year. As far as Belarus is concerned, I don't know whether these sanctions will work. I don't know whether the European Union has been particularly strong about them. I don't really understand what else a British Foreign Secretary can actually say than that, advising UK Airlines to avoid that airspace because it's unstable. And that's what you do. It happens with other countries. It happens with North Korea. It used to happen with Russia, actually, before the Berlin Wall fell. You used to have to, if you flew from here to Japan, for example, you'd go over the pole rather than across Russian territory. So that's what actually foreign secretaries do. They say that this is an introduction to somebody else's sovereign airspace, because, as I said, if you're in that aeroplane and it's registered, you are in that country where that plane is actually registered until you actually land. That's the way that airlines actually work. When you actually get to the country, that's a different matter. But actually flying, it's the sovereign space of that country where the aircraft is actually registered. In this case, it was Poland. I don't really understand what else he could have said. It's a rogue space. Yes, of course it is.
All right. Thank you so much for your views. We go to Adesua Morwa on COVID-19 updates. Adesua?
Good morning, guys. Now, although there's been a steady decline of the global coronavirus infections in recent weeks, the WHO says as of today, more cases have been reported so far this year than the whole of 2020. And on the current trend, the number of deaths will overtake last year's total within the next 3 weeks. Countries in South Asia are still posting record infections and deaths. India in particular is seeing a decline in infections, but a surge in deaths. Here in Nigeria, 42 new infections were recorded in 7 states and the nation's capital, Abuja. No COVID-related deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours in Nigeria. Now, the WHO's main decision-making body, the World Health Assembly, has been meeting for their annual meeting. It's the 74th this year, and of course, for a second year in a row, it's virtual. With the pandemic crisis raging, and of course, vaccine distribution as the main issues. While the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is asking people to adopt wartime mentality to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic, the WHO boss, Tedros Ghebreyesus, says it is time for world leaders to step up and make bold decisions to prevent future pandemics. Let's listen to some of the things Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus had to say.
Excellencies, we have come to a fork in the road. If we go on the same old way, we will get the same old result. A world that's unprepared, unsafe, and unfair. Make no mistake, this will not be the last time the world faces the threat of pandemic. It's an evolutionary certainty that there will be another virus with the potential to be more transmittable and more deadly than this one. This is not the time for incremental improvements or tinkering at the edges. This is the moment for bold ideas, bold commitment, and bold leadership, for doing things that have never been done before. We have a choice between cooperation, competition, or confrontation.
Take everything, but Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus didn't mince words when he was referring to how world leaders have reacted to the raging pandemic at the moment, and of course with vaccine distribution. And he was also saying, there needs to be bolder step. In fact, an ambitious goal was set for 10% vaccination in every country by September this year. Meanwhile, as that was happening yesterday, elsewhere, China was vehemently refuting reports claiming that researchers at a Wuhan lab were ill in November 2019 with COVID-19-like symptoms. And that's a month before China actually told the World Health Organization that there was corona outbreak in the country. The Wall Street Journal had reported over the weekend, citing a previously undisclosed U.S. intelligence report. Now, a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the lab statement released on March 23 this year showed that there were 0 COVID infections at Wuhan Institute of Virology. Meanwhile, the White House yesterday said it could not confirm the statement by the Wall Street Journal, but is pushing that the WHO investigates more transparently how, when, where the pandemic all began. One thing is certain, the latest report has fueled further debate about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I actually think it's reprehensible to reduce serious issues such as a pandemic or even open grazing to nationality, ethnic or otherwise. This silly tit for tat of it was Americans that brought the virus into Wuhan, or no, it was China that leaked the virus in the biowarfare, plan that they have some sinister plot. It absolves us of our responsibility to critically assess our relationship with the environment, with our habitats, because this appears to be a zoonotic disease. And since we accept, I'm sure we all do by this point, that there will be another pandemic,
Definitely.
potentially more deadly, we need to stop eating bushmeat and what have you, like that wet market in Wuhan. We need to actually respect the environment, our home. Otherwise, bats and snakes, and we'll have this really unhealthy relationship. And this is how a virus is born. So all this tit for tat and mudslinging is really most unhelpful.
Well, I think we must expect that China ordinarily, of course, will deny any attempt whatsoever to link it or its laboratories in Wuhan or elsewhere with the COVID-19 pandemic. That has been the position of China. And the U.S. has also been consistent in its, position that there is a connection. That has not yet been revealed by the WHO investigation team that went to China after all that up and down about whether they will be granted access or not. But in any case, the report, the main report that was offered by that WHO team, said, of course, that the investigation will still continue, that other angles will still be considered. That is that about that. But I think it's more important, the kind of statements that we have been having in the event of the meeting of the health ministers of the 194 members of the
World Health Assembly
of the WHO, the World Health Organization, 194 health members meeting. And the statement first by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who was saying yesterday that we are facing a pandemic of tsunami proportions. And he was saying, basically, the same points that we have had again and again, that look, the rich countries, they are taking care of themselves. The poorest countries of the world, they are suffering. And that, look, the major problem that we have with this war against COVID-19, because he used the expression war. He says the world is at war. And I think that that's an appropriate expression. And his view is that if we are at war, we need to adopt the same tactics that you use during war times. To which no part of the country, no part of the world is safe if other parts of the world are not safe. And that's consistent with the position taken by the WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus, who says that, look, 10 countries of the world, the guilty ones include Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, they are the ones who have administered 75% of available vaccine doses. And that in itself points to inequity in the world. And that the world has to come together. There must be global solidarity. The rich countries must help the poor countries. The UN Secretary General was talking about technology transfer. He was talking about flexible intellectual property sharing. And I guess that was in response to the position taken by the EU, that intellectual property sharing, patent waivers may not be a good idea. And I like the point made by Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, who said that, look, in this context, we probably need to come up with a new international treaty on pandemics. And that's consistent with the position taken over the weekend by the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who was talking about a global pandemic radar. Okay, we have this problem now with global equity, with access to vaccines. How do we prevent what will happen in the future? There is the CEPI, the Center for Environmental Pandemics Prevention Initiative by the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. But at a governmental level, I think it's important that the world begins to look ahead and begins to make an attempt to make sure that the tragedy, the omissions, the failures that we have witnessed with COVID-19 do not repeat themselves in the future.
I actually wanted a response from you, Adeswa, because it appears that it will repeat itself when we don't learn the lesson. Everything has been reduced to nationalism.
Yeah.
But indeed, Tundu, I mean, we fail to learn, we're doomed and damned to repeat it. Basically, the message is that the world has been too slow in the response. We've been too lackadaisical. And of course, the wealthy countries have decided to vaccinate themselves to safety. But that's just penny-wise, pounds foolish, a better way to put it, because no one is safe until everyone is safe, like the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, would like to say. So this is a problem we are all in until we solve it by ourselves for everyone, we're not going anywhere.
Well, but the footnote is that we can only all succeed together.
Yes, solidarity.
As Antonio Guterres put it. And COVID-19 must be a turning point for the world. A subtle reminder about the inequities, about the inequalities in the world, and the need to address that.
I mean, but the sad reality is it's a war between the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
And the haves will always win. And look at the have-nots. The have-nots like us here in Africa, we will never have the right conversation that the haves will always have. This is it. When COVID started, the haves, the likes of America and the likes, looked for how they could get a vaccine. So America put $400 million in Moderna and some other companies to be able to get a vaccine out. They ramped up vaccine production. They increased scale. What did we do, the have-nots? We continued to do the things that always affect the have-nots. Corruption. When we got money, put money out for palliatives, we didn't build infrastructure. All we did was we siphoned the money through corruption, and we created more poverty. The money didn't get to citizens. We didn't build new infrastructure. We've not been able to ramp up vaccine production. And we constantly do what the have-nots always do. You know what the have-nots always do?
No.
They eat their future today. So that's the disparity going on. And that is why the sad reality is that this will continue, but God knows when, until the have-nots started thinking or start thinking like those that have, that keep their resources and use their resources to build their country. The have-nots will always remain the have-nots, and those that have will always remain those that have.
Well, just before you go, Adeswa, Japan has opened 2 major vaccination centers yesterday
sites
in Osaka and Tokyo.
Yes.
And the government is insisting that the Tokyo Olympics would go on. But these vaccination centers that they have opened, 10,000 vaccination in Tokyo, 5,000 in Osaka. They promised 2 months ahead of the Tokyo Olympics. Would they be able to keep the target? With Japan entering the 4th wave, and Japan having recorded up to about 12,000 deaths. Well, you may say that's a small figure, but no figure is small where human lives are involved. Shouldn't we be now pushing the advocacy along with the people of Japan more vigorously that, look, the world will not end if the Tokyo Olympics does not take place?
You know, Dr. Batsi, it's a debate that's ongoing. So Japan has been in this 4th wave for quite a while. And of course, the new polls suggest that about 80% of people in Japan don't want the Olympics to go ahead. However, we all know that as scientists are saying that the COVID-19 pandemic will be with us for a long time to come. We are even talking about booster shots. So authorities are trying to convince people that they have this under control with these mass vaccination sites you talked about that have been opened in 2 cities so far. And you also recall that the government is pushing a lot of investment into COVID-19 vaccine, especially in acquiring them. Some million of those, I can't put the figure right now, have just arrived Japan ahead of these mass vaccination sites that have been opened. So it's a debate that the authority have to deal with, balancing lives and of course, ensuring that we have a safe Olympics. You also recall that this Olympic has been postponed. I'm sure Aaron will have a lot to tell you about that. Should the Olympics go ahead? Some people will say yes. I mean, there are also vaccine pharmaceuticals. There are major pharmaceuticals that have promised that they will vaccinate not just officials, but athletes coming to the Olympics. So it might just be safe. We have 2 months to go. Let's see how it plays out.
Okay, Adeswa, thank you so much for your time. The Olympic was cancelled during the Second World War, and there's no point. It can't be cancelled now, the First World War, I should say. All right, thank you so much for your time. Our dependable Rotu Sodiri is here to give us Africa Business Update. Over to you, Rotu, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, Rufai. Good morning to you. Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Dr. Tundu. I'm not going to stop eating bushmeats, just to put that out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good morning to you all as well. So we begin, of course, with the Monetary Policy Committee. All eyes on day 2 of the MPC meeting. The meeting, of course, this is the third meeting so far this year. We had the first one in January, we had the second one in March, we've had now, this is the third one in May. Essentially, with what the MPC is going to be looking at, the Monetary Policy Committee, is observing the recent events in the economy. Of course, inflation is going to be looming large over the MPC meeting at 18.12%. Also, although they should be encouraged for the fact that it decelerated from what we saw in the prior month in March. So that's one thing. Secondly, we went extensively through the economic indicators yesterday with respect to GDP, Q1 GDP 0.5% from 0.1% in Q4 2020. So the MPC is going to be saying, okay, what do we do? The benchmark interest rate right now is at 11.5%. They haven't moved it. They didn't change it at the last meeting, although 3 members out of about 9 voted to hike the interest rate and wanted to tighten. I suspect if inflation had hiked up even further, we could have seen more members voting at this particular meeting. I don't know, I'm not in their heads, but with 3 members wanting to hike rates, maybe that number would have increased if inflation had increased to a higher point. Since inflation has decelerated, this is now the chess game. What does the MPC do? They've been going with an accommodative stance up until this point. They want to make sure that the economy, as we've seen, is gradually improving. So perhaps they leave the rates where they are. With the analysts that I've been speaking with, a number of economists, Bismarck Rwane, whom you had last week or so, he also says the MPC should take a cautious approach. So I think the Monetary Policy Committee will keep the benchmark interest rates as 11.5. If you loosen and you reduce the rate, well, you're bringing more money into the system. That money could possibly chase foreign exchange. You might have more pressure on the exchange rate. If you tighten, as what those 3 members voted for at the last meeting in March, you constrict aggregate demand, you make borrowing more expensive. So it's a very delicate balancing act. But my prediction, we'll find out at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we'll talk about it on the Global Business Report. We'll analyze things. I think it'll be steady as she goes. So that's what we see. That's what we predict with the Monetary Policy Committee later this afternoon. We move to the GDP sectors that we said slowed down a bit. Real estate slowed down. We looked at this chart yesterday, or we looked at a slowdown yesterday. Real estate, agriculture, real estate to 1.77% from Q4, agriculture to 2.2%. Look at manufacturing. You'll see that manufacturing did grow to 3.4% from a contraction of 1.5% in Q4 2020. So Q4 2020, manufacturing contracted by 1.5%. Q1 2021, it grew by 3.4%. If today's This Day newspaper, in fact, when you'll be going through it with Emmanuel Efeni, one of the headlines is that the organized private sector, they've welcomed the growth in the manufacturing sector. However, they still say that the manufacturing sector needs a lot of support. They were surprised, actually. I mean, some analysts had the manufacturing sector contracting by about 0.5% or so in Q1 because of the existing structural issues that the manufacturing sector is facing. Power, supply chains, foreign exchange. It was a welcome surprise. But between the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, between the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, the organized private sector, they welcomed it, but they said that more work needs to be done. By the way, the Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI, from January and February, we saw an increase. So it was about 44 points in January, increased to 47.8 points in February. Purchasing Managers Index is a survey of manufacturers, asking them how employment levels are looking, supply chains, and so on and so forth. Mind you, that is below the threshold of 50 points. So if you're above 50 points, you're growing. If you're below 50 points, you're contracting. So manufacturing is still in a tight spot as far as the Purchasing Managers Index is concerned. So you got to put that within the context of GDP growth. It's encouraging, but more needs to be done. I think that's the general storyline for the Nigerian economy so far in the first 3 months of the year. Private sector credit supply. the central bank, I think for the month of April, looking at financial statistics for the economy, showed that credits supplied to the private sector, well, it was 1% year-on-year growth to 31.8 trillion, I believe, from 31.4 in March of last year. So 1% growth to the private sector. I believe Tundu mentioned SMEs yesterday, Doctor as well. Even all three of you, even Rufai, mentioned the fact that SMEs still need finance, access to finance, right? And so this private sector figures coming from the central bank show that there's still lots of finance that is needed with respect to the private sector. A lot of businesses need access to finance, but it's essentially flat, 1% growth, but still there's funds going to the private sector. Finally, the FX rates. Remember, I think we took this last time, where the central bank website didn't have the official rate, which was at 380 to the dollar. And remember, we talked about it. We talked to officials at the CBN. They said, look, we haven't used that rate in a while. We're using the NAFEX rate, investors and exporters window. So now, I believe we have the CBN rates up there. They've included it. They've included the NAFEX rate, which you normally would have to go to the FMDQ website. But as you can see there, 410 naira to the dollar. There's also other economic metrics. You can see the monetary policy rate. You can see crude oil. You can see inflation. So all those, expect those to be updated, especially the benchmark interest rate later this afternoon. But now it's official. I mean, if you didn't know already, for a year now, so the NAFEX rate is what we're using as the official rate on the website, and that's our update for African Business on the Morning Show.
Lotus, you recall that yesterday when you brought the report from the National Bureau of Statistics about GDP growth, put at 0.51%, and you did a breakdown. I said that it was surprising that manufacturing grew by 3.4%, agriculture by 2.28%, and the ICT sector, well, that was not surprising. That grew more than 6%. Later in the day, I saw a number of people, abusing me on social media, saying that, well, I didn't expect anything good from the Buhari administration, which is wrong. We were just crunching the numbers and trying to analyze what came out. And you've made the point this morning that with the challenges with power, with forex, with supply chain, and with security, it was quite heartening that there was growth in agriculture and also manufacturing, contrary to the projections. And it's good that the stakeholders in that particular sector are now saying this morning that they themselves were surprised. So I agree with you that what is required is more support. However, as for the Monetary Policy Committee, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, when maybe 4 weeks ago, when you brought this subject, I had expressed the opinion that I do not expect the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria to change its approach. That MPC has been very cautious because they are trying to manage inflation very carefully. But even now, with inflation at 18.1% and unemployment at 33.3%, and with GDP growth in Q1 at 0.51%, and the projection is that the growth we may have with regard to GDP this year may not even be more than 2.5%. So the economy remains fragile. We will expect by 2 p.m., I'm just guessing, that the MPC will still remain cautious. The MPC is likely to still adopt a wait-and-see approach. But if the MPC changes its position, that again will be another surprise. You talked about lending to the private sector and all of that. I think the point was made yesterday by Tundu when she talked about the MSMEs. Those MSC are important. And only yesterday, the EcoBank had a seminar on financial inclusion. And the Minister of State for Trade and Industry, one of these ministers that you just hear their voice once in a blue moon, once in 5 years, was at the event. And she made a good point, even if some of these ministers play possum all the time, they sleep and wake up. But it was good to hear her voice. First time I'm hearing her saying something intelligent. She made a point that, look, MSMEs are important. And this administration has a number of programs in place, including the ERGP, including the MSMEs fund, including plans by this administration to even set up an MSMEs bank. Now, these are useful initiatives. What government needs to do is to invest more, to focus more, to prioritize some of those measures so that you can have more investment, you can have more creativity, you can have more breathing room for the MSMEs who occupy a larger space within the economy. So when we talk about the private sector, credit for the private sector, I think it is important to go back to that same point that Tundu Abiola made yesterday about the MSMEs.
I mean, it's appalling that credit to the private sector, the small businesses grow by just 1%. It's an indication that all is not well with us. It's an indication that we don't support SME as a country. In times like this, you're supposed to tune up things and make it more accessible for people to be able to access credit and do business. And that's how you can start to ramp up economic productive numbers.
Well, Rufai, you need money. I mean, you need money to be able to extend that. So it's a tough situation where the economy is.
You need money. It's a tough situation in the economy. But, Rotus, we all remember the long-held decision or the long-held conversation we normally have. You need money to get money. You use money to print money, isn't it? So making funds available is the way to go. Right. And there are a lot of cash trapped in a lot of accounts in this country, or money that's not been judiciously used that can be plowed to the SMEs. And how do you even get the money across them in the first place if it's not shrouded in corruption? It is very sad for the biggest economy in Africa, just 1% growth on the money that goes to, or availability of funds. And I tell you, even most of the SMEs surviving in the country, there's a lot of foreign capital coming in. If not for that capital, you wouldn't be able to do anything.
No, I think what we need basically is greater transparency. Many of the SMEs schemes, either from the central bank or from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, many Nigerians do not know how to access those platforms. There's opaqueness in terms of even the communication process. And we think, we need to ask the government, particularly through SMEDAN. There's an agency called SMEDAN, Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, to do a lot more in terms of mobilizing the people, informing the people, and providing information about how to access those platforms. Those SMEs, they are there, and they can make a lot of difference.
But many of them know how to access the platforms.
Yes.
There's always allegations of corruption that the powers that be use those platforms to funnel the money back to themselves. Now, thank you, Rotus, for always bringing the figures, because perception is one thing, reality is quite another. And like you said, even analysts can be surprised sometimes when looking at cold, hard facts. Things might look a particular way in your tiny bubble, but that is not reflected across the country.
All right. Thank you so much, Rotus. We know where to get single-digit interest rate in this country, but how to get it is the wahala. And they'll start telling you stories afterwards.